Fun with GTS gradient tracking at Game Haven in Rochester, Minnesota. This footage was shot soon after the gradient tracking came out, way before the GT had gradient tracking. So we have a GT here with no gradient tracking and the GTS with gradient tracking. This is the very first time I went out and put the gradient tracking to the test. We're heading to an area here where it ended up being a bit muddy, so we turned around and went back to this hill right here, which I initially thought would be a good spot, and it kind of was, but it was smoother and harder ground on one side and bumpier, softer ground. It wasn't a good place to match the GT versus the GTS there. We still ran it a few times. However, there was another hill that was actually perfect. It was a hill I'd tried to make it up with the GT and GTS without gradient tracking and never made it. And even with gradient tracking, it took quite a few tries to actually get up there, and eventually I made it up there. But it did take some effort. We had to constantly change the settings on the gradient tracking.
No.
So it took a while to get it dialed in, and to dial it in, we had to dial it back a little bit and then kind of progress from there. And besides getting the settings dialed in, you have to kind of get yourself dialed in. You have to get used to it. And here Jinx is taking a crack at it, and he's had no warm-up. This is the first time he's ever ridden a GTS. We still don't have gradient tracking dialed in yet, and he does a better job on his first try than I did on my first try on this hill. I pretty much crashed into the hill the first time I did it, but that was before gradient tracking. So this is going to take us a while. Eventually I managed to make it, but we had to take some breaks because there's a bunch of disc golfers, so we went back to racing up this hill, which again was not the ideal hill because the right side was smoother and more packed, and the left side was looser gravel and more bumps. So it wasn't really long enough. If it would have been longer, it would have been fine, but it was just a little bit too short to actually do a proper comparison between the GT and the GTS. We still ran it a few times and had fun doing it. This hill, on the other hand, turned out to be a better test between the GTS and the GT. Here, Jinx had a clear head start on me, yet I was easily able to pass him because the GTS has that much more power than the GT. Also, with the gradient tracking, it made it easier to get through the divots, and it's not perfectly smooth there, and get up this section right here, whereas he's struggling not to drive the nose into the ground, basically. So the GTS has a clear advantage over the GT on hills, especially longer hills like this. I finally make it. I'm pretty stoked about it. The goal is to get to that wood bench up there, and I finally got it. In fact, I've made it up that hill to that wood bench every single time I've tried it since. And now I've got a slow motion clip for you here. I was playing around with response speed on the gradient tracking, and this is kind of a good type of section for doing stuff like that. I totally scraped the nose going up it, but the gradient tracking really freaking works, let me tell you.